a bronze bell in the Java Sea. The light does not penetrate here. A kilometer below the surface of the Java Sea, the world is one of perpetual, pressurized darkness, broken only by the artificial glow of a submersible's lamps. The beams cut through the murk like slow sabers, illuminating a seabed of silt and the scattered detritus of time-shattered pottery, ballast stones, the occasional timber blackened by centuries of immersion. Then, the light finds something that does not belong to the organic decay of wood or the muted color of clay. It catches a curve of greenish black, a hard edge obscured by a fine shroud of sediment. As the gentle thrusters of the vehicle waft the covering away, the object reveals itself. A bell. A large, bronze bell, lying on its side, half buried in the ocean floor. Its surface is worn impossibly smooth, not by the caress of hands, but by the endless, gentle abrasion of microscopic particles in the deep-sea current, a process that would take centuries, perhaps millennia. It sits in a silence so absolute it feels like a physical substance, a bell that will never ring, submerged in a place where its voice could never have been meant to be heard. The question hangs in the minds of the observers inside the submersible as palpably as the pressure outside their hull. What is a bell doing here, in the abyss, so far from any tower, any temple, any ship's prow, where it might have had a purpose? This bell was not the primary target of the expedition. The team was surveying the site of a known 9th century shipwreck, a Tang dynasty trader bound from China to the Spice Islands, laden with ceramics and gold. The bell was an anomaly, 100 meters from the main debris field. Its recovery was a delicate, weeks-long operation of suction dredges and floating lifts, a ballet of engineering to raise an object that had not felt sunlight for over 1,000 years. Once on the deck of the research vessel, under the blazing tropical sun, its strangeness became even more pronounced. The bronze was thick, heavy, and bore no inscriptions, no decorative patterns, no Buddhist motifs, or Sanskrit characters common to maritime artifacts from that era in Southeast Asian waters. It was starkly, fundamentally plain. The clapper, made of a different, iron-based alloy, had long since corroded away, leaving only a stain of oxidation inside the crown. The initial assumption was that it must have been cargo, perhaps a blank meant to be finished at its destination. But metallurgical analysis presented the first in a series of quiet puzzles. The alloy composition was unusual, with trace elements of nickel and arsenic that did not match the standard formulas of known Chinese or Southeast Asian bronze casting from the early medieval period. It was, as one conservator noted, idiosyncratic. It seemed to be the product of a singular, isolated recipe, a formula lost to the broader metallurgical tradition. Dating the bell proved even more complex and layered. The marine concretion, the hard layer of minerals, sand, and biological growth that crusts underwater objects suggested immense age. Attempts at direct dating, like analyzing the ratio of copper isotopes altered by prolonged exposure to seawater, pointed to a submergence period far exceeding 1,000 years. This created a stark chronological dissonance. It was found in the spatial context of a 9th century wreck, but its own material story whispered of a much deeper past. Some researchers cautiously proposed it was an archaic object even to the Tang sailors, perhaps salvaged from an earlier, unknown wreck and kept as a curiosity or a piece of valuable scrap metal destined for recasting. It was, in effect, an ancient relic carried by an ancient ship, a Russian nesting doll of mysteries. The mainstream anchor of the Tang dynasty wreck provides a fixed point in history, a documented era of intense maritime trade along routes mapped by scholars. Yet, the bell itself seems to float free from that anchor, a mysterious passenger from a darker, less charted time, its origins dissolving into the murk of prehistory. This leads to the lesser-known, curious detail that haunts the artifact's file and elevates it from a simple anomaly to a profound enigma. During high-resolution sonar mapping of the area surrounding the wreck site, geophysicists noted a subtle, unusual feature on the seabed topography, a long, low, linear depression running for several hundred meters across the otherwise flat plain of silt, as if something immense and heavy had once dragged through the soft sediment before settling into its final, silent rest. This scar was faint, only a meter or so deep, but distinct. It pointed in a direction that suggested a drift path, not from the known wreck site, but from a point further out in the deeper basin of the Java Sea. Intriguingly, the bell was found near the terminus of this faint scar on the ocean floor. The provocative, entirely speculative suggestion is that the bell did not come from the Tang ship at all, but was already there, resting in the deep, when the trader sank beside it centuries later. It is a ghostly possibility that the bell marks its own, separate catastrophe, a shipwreck so old its timbers have been entirely consumed by the sea, leaving behind only this one indestructible, vocal object, now mute. The scar could be the final mark of that older vessel's death glide across the abyssal plain. This detail is rarely highlighted in popular accounts, but in research circles, it is the detail that refuses to settle, that suggests the bell's story is far older and more isolated than its proximity to the Tang wreck implies. Scholars still debate whether the bell's location is a coincidence of currents and geology, or a silent marker of a forgotten voyage from an epoch before the major maritime empires of Asia took shape. Its plainness is its greatest mystery. A ceremonial bell from a temple or palace would be adorned with symbols of power, deities, or protective inscriptions. A ship's bell, used to mark watches or sound alarms in the age of sail, would typically be made of iron or a simpler, cheaper alloy. This bronze bell's sheer, unadorned quality and sophisticated, if unique, metallurgy suggest a functional purpose, but one that required significant resources and skilled craftsmanship. Was it a signal bell for a coastal community living on shores long since eroded or submerged by rising sea levels after the last glacial period? A deep-toned alarm for a settlement wary of pirates or invaders, its voice meant to carry over land and water? Or perhaps, as some fringe but persistent theories suggest, it served a purpose tied to the sea itself in a more mystical or practical way, a navigational marker of sorts, intended to be suspended in a buoyant float, its sound carrying over the waves in fog to guide fishermen home? The utter lack of a surviving suspension loop or crown staple complicates this, but the deep-sea environment could have utterly corroded away such a ferrous fixture, leaving no trace. Others point to more esoteric possibilities, such as its use in synchronizing rituals across distant islands, its tone acting as a sonic beacon for gatherings, a practice lost when the culture that understood it dispersed or fell. The bell's most profound impact is not in any definitive answer it provides, but in the atmospheric, almost philosophical questions it generates. It is an object designed to create sound, to communicate, to mark time or danger or ceremony, found in the place on earth most hostile to sound. Its voice, if it ever had one, has been stolen by the immense pressure and density of the water, a medium that distorts, muffles, and swallows vibrations. Holding it, one is gripped by the chilling notion of futility, of a designed purpose utterly negated by its context. What kind of event, what catastrophic plunge, consigned an instrument of communication to the realm of eternal silence? The smoothness of its surface, polished by the patient, endless touch of the deep sea, gives it the appearance of an object that has been waiting not to be found, but to be transformed by its environment into something alien to its original nature. It feels less like a lost item and more like a deliberate deposit, a message placed in a bottle where no one could ever retrieve it, the act of deposition being the entire point, an offering to gods of the deep, or a solemn burial for a sound. This sense of intentional silence connects it to other mysteries of the deep, like the hypothetical, older wreck It may have come from a vessel carrying a cargo whose meaning is now inaccessible. The bell becomes a symbol for all the knowledge sunk beneath the waves, not in libraries, but in the holds of ships that never made port, in the oral traditions of sailors whose stories died with them. Its smooth, featureless surface becomes a blank slate upon which we project our questions about lost navigation techniques, forgotten sea routes, and early, failed attempts at transoceanic contact. It stands as a monument to the vast majority of human history that left no written record, only physical objects stripped of their stories by time and the elements. As the bell now sits in a climate-controlled museum storage room, far from the crushing dark of its resting place, it serves as a bridge between two incomprehensible silences: the silence of the deep ocean and the silence of a lost chapter of human endeavour. It whispers of voyages that left no record, of ships whose names are forgotten, sailing routes that vanished from memory. It prepares us for the next discovery, one found not in the lightless deep, but in the equally profound and protected darkness of a sealed cave, where shadows are cast by nothing at all, and where the art on the walls seems to defy the very tools and light sources that must have been used to create it. The bell's muteness is a prelude to a visual enigma, a reminder that our ancestors left behind puzzles not just in the objects they made, but in the very impressions they left upon the world. The impossibility of Chauvet Cave. Deep within the limestone cliffs of the Ardèche Gorge in southern France, a different kind of darkness reigns. It is not the pressurized dark of the deep sea, but a dry, still, and ancient dark preserved behind a fallen curtain of rock for over 20 millennia. On the 18th of December 1994, this darkness was breached by the light of three explorers, Jean-Marie Chauvet, Eliette Brunel, and Christian Hilaire. As they crawled through a narrow passage, their lamps swept across the walls of a vast hidden chamber. What they witnessed in that trembling circle of light was not merely old, it was a temporal shock, a gallery of genius preserved in a time capsule of stone and silence. But among the staggering menagerie of horses, lions, rhinos, and bears, rendered with breathtaking movement and anatomical precision, there exists a subtler, more confounding mystery. In certain chambers, the cave walls bear the outlines of hands, both positive, where paint was sprayed around a splayed hand, and negative, where a hand was placed on the rock and paint was blown over it. And near some of these, particularly in a recess known as the Megaloceros Gallery, are shadows. Not shadows cast by the modern explorers' lamps, but shadows painted onto the rock itself, dark, blurred smudges and silhouettes that appear behind or alongside the depicted animals. These are not forms of beasts or humans. They are abstract, formless, dark patches. Yet, their placement is deliberate. They appear where, if a torch or a simple stone lamp were held by a painter standing in a specific spot, a real shadow would indeed fall across that section of the wall. But the rock surface there is flat. There is no protruding feature to cast such a shadow. The cave artists, some 36,000 years ago, did not simply paint the animals they saw, they painted the absence of light that would have accompanied the act of seeing them. They painted the impossible. Shadows cast by nothing. The mainstream anchor here is one of the most solid in all of archaeology, the Chauvet Cave itself. Its authenticity and age, meticulously verified through radiocarbon dating of charcoal from the torches and paint pigments, place its artistic activity in two distinct periods. One around 36,000 years ago during the Aurignacian culture, and another around 31,000 years ago in the Gravettian. The cave's contents represent the very dawn of unquestioned, sophisticated human symbolic expression. The conservation of the site is a scientific endeavor of the highest order, with a precise climate control system and a sealed, research-only entrance to protect the delicate microenvironment that preserved the paintings in such pristine condition. The paintings themselves are the anchor, their style, their subject matter, their use of the rock's contours to create three-dimensionality are all subjects of intense academic study. They are a window onto the upper Paleolithic mind, a mind already capable of complex abstraction, narrative, and profound observation. Yet, within this universally acknowledged masterpiece lies the curious, lesser-known detail of the non-representational shadows or pseudo-shadows. These are not the famous, dramatic spotted horses or the confronting lions. They are background elements, easily overlooked. In one panel, behind a magnificent depiction of two rutting woolly rhinoceroses, the wall is stained with a large, diffuse, dark area. It does not resemble an animal. It resembles a pool of darkness. Analysis of the pigment shows it is the same charcoal-based paint used elsewhere, applied in a deliberately diluted, smudged fashion. The placement corresponds almost exactly to where the shadow of an artist, holding a light source aloft to view the emerging painting, would have fallen. The implication is staggering. The artists were not just depicting the outer world, they were documenting the very circumstance of the depiction. They were incorporating the temporary, fleeting conditions of the creative act into the permanent artwork. It is a meta-statement in charcoal, a self-aware inclusion of the creator's own presence and its effect on the environment. Scholars still debate whether these markings were intentional representations of shadow, abstract symbols with a meaning we cannot grasp, or simply the accidental byproduct of the painting process, soot from a torch held too close. But the deliberate dilution of pigment to create a softer, more atmospheric effect in specific, logically consistent locations argues strongly for intent. This leads to a fringe-adjacent, but deeply intriguing line of inquiry. Some paleo-archaeologists and historians of art, focusing on the sensory experience of the cave, have proposed that the paintings were not meant to be viewed in static, flat light, but in the dynamic, a flickering light of torch flame. In this environment, the paintings would have moved, the contours would have seemed to shift, the animals to breathe. And in that dance of light and shadow, these painted shadows would have interacted with the real shadows cast by the viewers. They would have created a visual dialogue between the permanent image and the ephemeral play of light, blending the real and the represented in a way that static modern lighting can never replicate. A few researchers have gone further, suggesting the possibility of using multiple light sources in sequence, or even primitive reflective surfaces made of polished stone or water pools, to create specific shadow effects that interacted with these painted dark zones. While there is no direct evidence for such sophisticated stagecraft, the mere presence of these pseudo-shadows suggests the artists were acutely conscious of the phenomenology of light in their sacred space. They were not just painters, they were the first lighting designers, crafting an experience where the boundary between the art and the viewer's immediate reality dissolved. The haunting power of this detail is that it connects us, across an unimaginable gulf of time, to a moment of subjective experience. We can understand, on an intellectual level, the skill required to draw a perfect bison. But to understand the impulse to paint the shadow you are casting while you work, that is to glimpse a moment of self-reflection, of a consciousness pausing to record not just the object of its gaze, but the condition of seeing itself. It transforms the cave from a simple gallery into a recorded performance, where the ghost of the artist's own blocking their position, their movement, their light is frozen on the wall alongside their subject. It suggests a cognitive modernity that is humbling. These were not primitive scribblers. They were philosophers with charcoal, exploring the nature of perception and representation. This subtle curiosity loop, the painting of an ephemeral shadow, resonates with the earlier mystery of the bell's purposeful silence. Both are about capturing or representing something transient and contextual. The bell's intended sound is absent, lost to the medium that surrounds it. The cave shadow is a representation of an absence of light made permanent. One is about a lost function in an impossible environment. The other is about documenting the conditions of creation itself. As we move from this profound act of ancient meta-art, we find another kind of loss, not of sound or shadow, but of life itself. A life so potent, so useful, that it was celebrated on currency and in poetry, only to vanish from the earth as if it were a dream that the waking world decided to forget. The Silphium of Cyrene. Upon a wind-scoured plateau overlooking the deep blue of the Mediterranean, in the heart of what was once the flourishing Greek colony of Cyrene in modern-day Libya, a series of ancient coins tell a story of an obsession. Struck in fine silver, these coins do not merely bear the profile of a god or a ruler. Their most common, most resonant design features a singular, elegant plant, a tall, stout stalk with a cluster of small flower heads at its top, and long basal leaves splayed like a sunburst at its root. Next to it, often, stands a woman, sometimes the nymph Cyrene herself, touching the plant with a reverent hand. This is not a generic pastoral symbol. This is a portrait, a precise numismatic homage to a specific species, Silphium. To the people of the ancient world, from the Greeks to the Romans, Silphium was not just a plant. It was a commodity that shaped empires, a medicine that treated everything from coughs to epilepsy, a culinary spice that defined haute cuisine, and, most famously, a contraceptive so effective and sought after that it was believed to be worth its weight in denarii. And then, within a few centuries of its documented glory, it vanished, not from a single field or region, but from the face of the earth entirely. By the time of Emperor Nero in the 1st century AD, it was already a legendary ghost, with the last known stalk presented as a bizarre curiosity to the emperor himself. The extinction of Silphium presents a forbidden discovery, not in the sense of a hidden object, but of a lost truth. The complete eradication of a knowledge system rooted in a living thing, a pillar of ancient science and society that simply ceased to be. The mainstream anchor for Silphium is robust and multifaceted, rooted in classical literature, economics, and botany. The historian Theophrastus, Aristotle's successor, provides detailed, albeit frustratingly non-specific, descriptions of it in his Inquiry into Plants. He notes its thick root, its celery-like leaves, its aromatic resin. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, chronicles its economic and medical importance with the lament of a man witnessing its end. He records that the entire known supply grew in a narrow strip of land, roughly 30 by 200 miles, in the territory of Cyrene, and that the Cyrenians, recognizing its value, maintained a state monopoly on its harvest and sale. Its juice, known as laser or laser piscium, was exported in specially sealed jars and became a staple of Roman gourmet cooking, mentioned in the recipes of Apicius. Archaeologically, the coins of Cyrene are the most potent physical evidence. They are not vague symbols. They are detailed enough that botanists have long attempted and failed to match them to any known surviving species. The plant was so central to Cyrene's identity that it became its emblem, stamped on the currency that fueled its trade, a constant reminder of the source of its wealth. Its extinction is one of the first documented cases of human-driven species loss, a cautionary tale written in silver and parchment. Yet, intertwined with this well-documented history is a lesser-known, curious detail that speaks to the plant's almost mystical status. Ancient sources, including Pliny and the poet Catullus, hint at a peculiar characteristic. Silphium could not be reliably cultivated. It refused to be transplanted or farmed. It thrived only in its wild state on that specific North African plateau. Attempts to grow it elsewhere, even in seemingly similar soils and climates, failed utterly. This gave rise to the belief that the plant was a divine gift, its existence tied to the very essence of that particular land. More intriguingly, some accounts suggest its harvest was governed by ritualistic rules. It was said the root, the most valuable part, had to be extracted at a specific time, possibly under a specific moon, and with a prescribed tool, perhaps one made of a certain material. The penalty for harvesting out of season or with the wrong method was severe, not just legally, but, it was believed, cosmically. This blurring of agronomy, economics, and sacred law created a perfect storm. The insatiable Roman demand, coupled with a plant that could not be farmed and a harvesting protocol that may have been ecologically sensitive, almost certainly led to its overexploitation and collapse. Scholars still debate whether its extinction was purely a tragedy of the commons, a result of climatic shift, or a consequence of a lost symbiotic relationship, perhaps a specific pollinator or a soil bacterium that also perished, locking the secret of its propagation away forever. This impossibility of cultivation is the fringe-adjacent heart of the mystery. It pushes silphium from the category of a lost spice into the realm of a lost technology. The knowledge of how to use it as medicine, as spice, as contraceptive, was a form of technology. But the knowledge of how to sustainably interact with it, to ensure its continued existence, was a higher-order technology, one that appears to have been encoded in ritual and taboo. When the last harvesters who understood those subtle, unwritten rules died, or when economic pressure overrode them, the technology failed. The plant was not just consumed, it was decontextualized to death. Modern research has attempted to identify silphium's closest living relative, with most guesses pointing to members of the Ferula genus, like giant fennel or Asafoetida, which Romans called the poor man's silphium. But chemical analysis of residues from ancient pottery or study of these relatives has yet to unlock the specific compound or combination of compounds that gave silphium its legendary properties, particularly its purported contraceptive efficacy. Was it a powerful estrogenic compound, an effective abortifacient? The secret is locked in the genetic code of a species that no longer exists. The thought loop here connects back to the painted shadows of Chauvet. There, ancient artists captured an ephemeral condition of perception. With silphium, an entire civilization built a significant part of its medical, culinary, and economic reality around an ephemeral biological entity. Both represent a profound ancient engagement with transient phenomena. But the loss of silphium is of a different, more consequential magnitude. It forces a haunting question. How much of ancient expertise was bioliterate in a way we have forgotten? Their pharmacopoeia was not a list of chemical isolates. It was a living library of plants, each with its own ecology, its own harvest times, its own rituals of reciprocity. The extinction of silphium is like the burning of a great library, where only one copy of each book existed. The coins of Cyrene are its haunting bookplates, stamped on silver, reminding us of the title of a text we can never read. This profound loss of a living secret leads us to consider a different kind of preservation, not of a plant, but of a moment of violence and artistry so extreme it fused the earth itself. From the organic world of a vanished herb, we turn to the inorganic, to stone that was subjected to a heat so intense it transformed into something else entirely, creating a fortress whose very walls whisper of a forgotten, ferocious power. The high mountain dagger of the Andes. At an altitude that steals the breath, where the air is thin and the sky a profound, punishing blue, the ruins of an Inca Capacocha ritual site cling to the shoulder of Mount Lulalico in Argentina. Here, at 6,739 meters above sea level, one of the highest archaeological sites in the world, the cold is not merely an absence of heat, it is an active, preservative force. In 1999, a team of archaeologists made a discovery that was both deeply solemn and mechanically perplexing. Alongside the perfectly preserved mummies of 3 Inca children, offerings to the gods for the stability of the empire, lay a collection of grave goods, miniature figurines, textiles, and food. Among them was a tumi, a ceremonial knife. Its handle was wrapped in exquisite, fine-spun threads, but it was the blade itself that gave pause. It was not the typical bronze or copper alloy of the Inca. It was steel. Not the crude, puddled steel of early forges, but a finely made alloy. This steel dagger, found in a context dating to the late 15th century, over 150 years before the Spanish introduced European metallurgy to the region, presented a silent, cold anomaly. Even more startling was the sheath. It was not made of wood or leather, but of a delicate, gossamer-like fabric, a weave so fine it seemed spun from cloud. This material, which threatened to dissolve at the touch of modern, humid air, had survived for 5 centuries only because of the deep freeze of the high Andes. The dagger wrapped in silk, or rather, in its Andean equivalent, was a contradiction. A weapon of immense, advanced durability, sheathed in a material of supreme, fragile impermanence. The mainstream anchor is the site itself, the Lulayaco Peak and its Inca mummies. The Lulayaco children are among the most significant archaeological finds of the last century, offering an unprecedented, frozen-in-time view of Inca ritual sacrifice, or capacocha. The site's stratigraphy, the associated pottery styles, and radiocarbon dating place the burial firmly around 1500 AD, at the height of the Inca Empire under Huayna Capac. The scientific studies conducted on the mummies, their clothing, and their stomach contents have painted a vivid picture of their final months and the elaborate ceremony that led them to the mountaintop. This context is impeccable, documented, and forms the uncontested stage upon which the puzzling artifact was found. The ceremonial nature of the offering is clear. Everything placed with the children was of the highest quality, meant to accompany and honor them in the afterlife, and to impress the deities receiving the sacrifice. Yet, the steel dagger and its sheath introduce a lesser-known, curious detail that challenges the narrative of pre-Columbian technology. The steel, upon analysis, was found to be a product of carburization, a process of heating iron in a carbon-rich environment to increase its hardness. While the Inca were master metallurgists with gold, silver, and bronze, the consistent production of high-quality steel was not part of their known technological repertoire. The iron they occasionally used was typically meteoric in origin, revered but not systematically smelted from ore. So, the presence of this steel blade suggests one of several possibilities, each intriguing. The first is independent innovation. That Inca or pre-Inca metalworkers in the Andes had, in isolated instances, achieved carburization, perhaps by accident in a particularly hot furnace, and recognized the superior product. The second is long-distance trade or diffusion. Could a piece of high-quality steel, perhaps from Asia via Pacific drift voyages, or through incredibly attenuated trade networks across the Americas, have found its way to the Inca, who then revered it as a rare, divine material? The third, more controversial, is chronological reassessment, though the solid dating of the mummies makes this highly unlikely. Scholars still debate whether the dagger represents a technological peak that was never scaled again, a lost secret of Andean smiths, or an extraordinary import that became a one-of-a-kind royal heirloom. The sheath material deepens the mystery. Often described in reports as an ultra-fine weave, it is sometimes likened to a proto-silk, though not from silkworms. It is believed to be made from the hair of the vicuña, the smallest and rarest of the South American camelids, whose fleece is finer than cashmere. The weaving technique is so advanced that individual threads are nearly invisible to the naked eye. This fabric represents the absolute apex of Andean textile technology, an art form they considered the highest form of cultural expression, more valued than gold. The pairing is deliberate and symbolic. The hardest, most durable material they could produce or acquire, the steel, was protected by the softest, most delicate, and most precious material they could weave. It speaks to a philosophy of containment, where supreme strength is sheathed in supreme value and vulnerability. The fragility of the sheath was not a flaw, it was the point. It meant the dagger was not for mundane use. To draw it would be to violate a sacred container. This leads to a fringe-adjacent, haunting line of inquiry. Some researchers of Andean cosmology point to the Inca concept of yanantin, a philosophy of complementary opposites that must exist in harmony: male, female, sun, moon, hard, soft. The steel dagger and its vicuña sheath could be a perfect physical manifestation of Yanantin. But there is a more speculative layer. Could the materials themselves have been chosen for more than their physical and symbolic properties? Could the specific alloy of the steel, perhaps containing trace elements from a particular ore source, and the specific organic compounds in the treated vicuña hair, have had a perceived interactive property? Was the sheath meant not just to protect the blade, but to influence it over time, to imbue it with certain qualities through long-term contact in the ritual context? While no evidence supports a chemical interaction, the thought reflects the Andean worldview, where objects were not inert, but possessed agency, and could be in relationship with each other. The dagger set, then, becomes a frozen dialogue between materials, a conversation in metal and fibre, placed on a mountaintop to communicate with the gods. The curiosity loop here ties back to the lost biological knowledge of silphium. There, a complete system of use and sustainability vanished with a plant. Here, we have a technological artifact, a product of possibly unique metallurgical knowledge, enshrouded in a textile representing the peak of another technology. Both are one-off discoveries that hint at lost recipes, whether agricultural or artisanal. The dagger's steel might represent a formula that died with its maker, just as the secret of cultivating silphium died with its last harvesters. It is a testament to the fragility of high knowledge in the ancient world, where expertise was often housed in small guilds or even individual families. As we contemplate this union of the unyielding and the ephemeral, preserved by ice, our journey turns from a single, frozen artifact to a larger, warmer-scale enigma. We leave the intentional offering on the mountain and descend to a windswept plateau, where an entire complex of structures is built from stones that seem to have undergone a transformation so violent it bypassed masonry and arrived at fusion. From a sheathed blade, we move to walls that appear to have been welded by a giant's breath. A mammoth tusk chart from Siberia. The tundra is a vast, open ledger of time, its pages written in permafrost and bone. In the relentless, grinding advance and retreat of ice ages, it has preserved a record of megafauna whose scale defies modern imagination. Among the most poignant of these relics are the tusks of the woolly mammoth, often found in staggering numbers, emerging from eroding riverbanks and melting glaciers. Most are fragments, broken by time and pressure. But in the late 1990 seconds, on a remote stretch of the Yana River basin in northeastern Siberia, a team from the Russian Academy of Sciences unearthed something different. It was a tusk, nearly complete, but its surface was not smooth or naturally textured. It was covered in markings. Deliberate, deep, and precise incisions formed a complex network of lines, curves, and symbols. At first glance, to an untrained eye, it might resemble idle scratching or butchery marks. But the arrangement was ordered, repetitive, and covered a significant portion of the tusk's curved surface. When cleaned and studied under raking light, the markings resolved into a startling suggestion: a map, not a picture of animals or people, but a topographic representation. It showed what appeared to be a river system with tributaries, marked with notches that could indicate distances or specific features, and symbols that might denote hunting grounds, camps, or dangerous areas. The truly forbidden discovery lay in the dating. The tusk itself was radiocarbon dated to approximately 12,500 years before present, and the geological analysis of the region, comparing the depicted waterways to core samples and ancient riverbed sediment data, suggested the map did not correspond to the modern Yana River landscape. Instead, it seemed to chart a hydrographic network that had existed during the last glacial maximum, a landscape that had vanished under rising seas and shifting courses over 10 millennia ago. This was not a map of the world as the carver's contemporaries knew it. It was an ancestral memory, etched in ivory, of a world that was already ancient history to them. The mainstream anchor for this discovery is the rigorous science of Pleistocene archaeology and geology of Siberia. The Yana River sites are among the most important for understanding the earliest human presence in the Arctic, with evidence of hunting camps dating back over 30,000 years. The discovery of the carved tusk was documented in situ, its stratigraphic context carefully recorded. The dating methods applied to both the ivory and the surrounding soil layer are standard and reliable. Furthermore, the field of paleohydrogeology, reconstructing ancient river systems through sediment analysis, provides a solid, evidence-based backdrop against which the carved lines can be compared. The consensus that the landscape depicted is an older, Pleistocene one is not wild speculation, but a conclusion drawn from physical data about river migration, sea level change, and glacial retreat. This places the artifact firmly in the realm of legitimate, if extraordinary, archaeological study. Yet, the lesser-known, curious detail that elevates this from a fascinating map to a profound cognitive puzzle involves the symbols themselves. Interspersed among the river lines are a series of non-representational marks, sequenced dots, crosshatches, and a recurring symbol that resembles a branching tree or a stylized antler. These do not correspond to any known pictographic system from later Siberian cultures. More intriguingly, microscopic analysis of the incision grooves revealed something unexpected. The tool used was not a flint blade, which would leave characteristic striations. The grooves were V-shaped and remarkably uniform, suggesting the use of a burin, a specialized engraving tool made of a harder material. A few researchers have pointed to the possibility of a metal point, as some copper artifacts are known from contemporary Siberia, but this is highly contested. The real curiosity is the wear pattern within the grooves. In several of the longer, flowing lines representing major rivers, the microscopic polish indicates the marks were made in a single, confident session. But the smaller, symbolic marks show signs of repeated retouching, recutting, and polishing over time, as if they were being actively used and updated. This suggests the tusk was not a static record, but a working document, a piece of functional geographic technology that was consulted and modified across perhaps a generation or more. Scholars still debate whether this object was a practical guide for nomadic hunters, a territorial claim, a repository of mythological geography, or all three intertwined. This notion of a functional, multi-generational tool leads to the fringe-adjacent speculation that is both tantalizing and untestable. Could this tusk map be part of a larger, lost system of glacial age information technology? The Paleolithic peoples who inhabited Siberia were not the simple, struggling bands of outdated caricature. They were adept survivors in the harshest of environments, which requires sophisticated knowledge transmission. Some anthropologists have proposed that such carved tusks might have been sangaku of the Ice Age, teaching aids, or mnemonic devices used by elders to instruct the young in the dangerous, shifting geography of a world emerging from ice. The symbols might not be writing in a linguistic sense, but a proto-script for encoding information about migration routes, predator locations, or sources of critical materials like flint or ochre. The repeated modification of the symbols could represent the updating of this information as animal patterns changed or new routes were discovered. In this reading, the tusk is not merely a map, but a dynamic database, a hard drive made of ivory. The haunting implication of the Yana River tusk map is the depth of memory it implies. The landscape it depicts was already thousands of years old when the artisan's tool bit into the ivory. This means knowledge of that older geography was preserved orally, through story and song, for longer than the entire span of recorded human history. It represents a chain of memory stretching back to a time when the coastlines were hundreds of miles farther out, when vast, now drowned plains like Beringia were populated with game. The map is a fossilized thought, a snapshot of a long oral tradition concerning a lost world. It forces us to reconsider the chronological scale of indigenous knowledge, a scale that can make our own written histories seem like recent entries in a very old book. This theme of ancient, encoded knowledge of the land connects backward to the painted shadows of Chauvet, another form of capturing environmental experience, and forward to our next mystery. From a map of a vanished physical landscape, we move to a structure engineered to capture a very specific, vanishing moment of celestial light. The Tusk recorded geography lost to time. The next site was built to commemorate, and perhaps invoke, a moment of time lost to the annual cycle, a chamber designed for an endless dusk. The Dusk Chamber of Newgrange. In the gentle green hills of Ireland's Boyne Valley, a mound rises from the earth. It is not a natural formation. Built over 5,000 years ago, centuries before Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid of Giza, Newgrange is a passage tomb, a monument of staggering ambition for its Neolithic builders. Its white quartz facade, reconstructed from found stones, gleams in the rare Irish sun, but its true secret lies within, in a darkness that has been absolute for millennia. A long, narrow passage of immense, corbelled stones leads to a central cruciform chamber. For 364 days of the year, this inner sanctum is a place of profound, damp blackness, the air thick with the silence of the ancients. But for a few precious minutes around the winter solstice, at dawn, something impossible happens. As the sun crests the distant horizon on those shortest days, a sliver of golden light penetrates through a unique feature. A perfectly positioned roof box, a slit-like opening above the main entrance. The beam, narrow and intense, travels up the 19-metre passageway, its path calculated with mind-bending precision, and finally illuminates the very back wall of the central chamber, deep in the heart of the mound. For approximately 17 minutes, the chamber, built to house the bones of the dead, is filled with a radiant, living light. Then, as swiftly as it came, the light retreats, and the darkness reclaims its dominion. This is not an accidental alignment. The engineering tolerances are too fine, the intent too clear. Newgrange was not just a tomb, it was a machine for capturing a specific moment of celestial time, a chamber built for an endless recurring dusk, where the sun briefly conquers the dark of the underworld. The mainstream anchor for Newgrange is unimpeachable. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of the most studied and significant megalithic structures in Europe. Its construction is dated to around 3200 BCE in the Neolithic period. The archaeological record is rich. The excavation in the 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds by Professor Michael J. O'Kelly, who famously witnessed and documented the solstice phenomenon himself, revealed the intricate structure, the stunning spiral and geometric art carved on the orthostats, and the ritual deposits of human remains and grave goods. The engineering feat is universally acknowledged, the corbelled roof that has remained watertight for over 5 millennia, the massive curbstones, the precise astronomical alignment. This is not fringe history. It is the cornerstone of European prehistory, a testament to the organizational skill, astronomical knowledge, and spiritual depth of early farming communities. The winter solstice alignment itself is now a publicly witnessed event, managed by the Office of Public Works, with a lottery for the few who can enter the chamber at dawn during the solstice window. It is a documented, repeatable phenomenon, as solid as science can make an ancient mystery. Yet, intertwined with this well-established fact is a lesser-known curious detail that complicates the simple narrative of a solstice light show. Inside the chamber, on some of the orthostats, are carved symbols, most famously the triple spiral. But there are also series of concentric circles, zigzags, and chevrons. During the solstice illumination, the path of the beam does not simply splash light randomly. As it travels up the passage, it interacts with these carvings in a specific sequence. It first strikes a series of notch-like marks, then highlights specific spirals, before finally pooling in the rear recess, which itself is intricately carved. It is a structured visual narrative written in light and stone. Furthermore, acoustic studies of the chamber have revealed unusual resonant properties. Certain frequencies, particularly those within the range of the human voice or a drum, are amplified or focused in specific parts of the chamber. The combination suggests a multisensory ritual, not just the visual drama of the light, but a sonic component, perhaps chanting or rhythmic percussion, timed to coincide with the sunbeam's journey. Scholars still debate whether the alignment was primarily a symbolic rebirth ritual linking the sun with the ancestral dead, a sophisticated calendar marker for agricultural cycles, or an immersive theatrical experience designed to induce altered states of consciousness in a priestly elite. This leads to a fringe-adjacent but deeply evocative line of thought. Some researchers of archaeoacoustics and Neolithic cosmology have proposed that the entire structure might be designed not just to capture light, but to measure a specific quality of it during that sacred window. The precision of the roof box slit might be designed to create a beam of a particular width and intensity, illuminating carvings that act as a form of calibration. Could the sequence of illuminated symbols represent a count, a timing mechanism, or a symbolic representation of the sun's journey through the underworld that was meant to be read by an initiated observer? Even more speculative is the idea that the brief illumination was meant to interact with something that is now lost, perhaps a reflective pool of water in the chamber floor, a hanging crystal or polished stone, or even a specific type of incense smoke that would make the beam visible as a solid column of light. The combination of precise astronomy, resonant architecture, and encoded art suggests a level of integrated scientific and spiritual thought that we are only beginning to apprehend. The chamber is a locked device, and we have observed one of its functions, the solstice alignment, but we may be missing the full operation manual. The curiosity loop here connects powerfully to the Mammoth Tusk map. Both artifacts represent an intense, empirical engagement with the natural world, translated into a permanent, physical record. The Tusk map encoded a lost geography derived from generations of observation. Newgrange encodes a precise celestial event derived from generations of watching the sky. Both are technologies of memory, ways of freezing transitory knowledge, the layout of a vanished land, the path of a winter sun, into a form that could outlast the individuals who discovered it. They are bridges across deep time, meant to speak to the future. This concept of a structure built to commune with cosmic cycles prepares us for a discovery of a more personal, yet equally enigmatic nature. From a chamber built for a celestial event witnessed by a community, we turn to an object meant for a single face, a mask of gold, crafted with exquisite skill, depicting a ruler whose very identity and origin have been swallowed by history, leaving behind only a visage of alien dignity. The Jiroft civilization's gold mask. In the arid, unforgiving landscape of southeastern Iran, near the city of Jiroft, the Halil River snakes through a plain. For centuries, flash floods have periodically scoured its banks, occasionally revealing glimpses of worked stone and broken pottery. To the local people, these were simply old things. But in 2001, after a particularly severe flood, the river unveiled a secret on a staggering scale: the outlines of what appeared to be an extensive necropolis, littered with artifacts of breathtaking quality. This triggered a wave of looting, followed by a frantic race by archaeologists to salvage what remained. From the plundered graves and subsequent official excavations emerged evidence of a previously unknown Bronze Age civilization, flourishing around 2500 to 2200 BCE, contemporary with ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley. Among the looted items that eventually surfaced on the international art market, and the fewer pieces recovered by authorities, was a category of object that immediately redefined the era's artistry. Chlorite vases carved with intricate, mythic scenes of animals, architecture, and heroes. And then there was the gold. Not just jewelry, but a life-sized funeral mask. It was not the serene, idealized death mask of a pharaoh like Tutankhamun. This mask, hammered from a single sheet of gold, depicted a man with a full, braided beard, a prominent, straight nose, and wide, almond-shaped eyes that held an expression of calm, inscrutable authority. The features were distinctive, but they matched no known ethnic portrait from neighboring Mesopotamia or Elam. The mask, and the civilization it represented, seemed to have emerged from the sands fully formed, with its own artistic lexicon, its own iconography, and its own forgotten kings. The visage was one of undeniable power, but it was the face of a stranger, a ruler from an unnamed dynasty who presided over a kingdom that history had simply overlooked. The mainstream anchor for this discovery is the ongoing archaeological work in the Jiroft region, which has moved from salvage to systematic study. While looting destroyed much contextual information, controlled excavations at sites like Konar Sandal have revealed large, mud brick platforms suggestive of major ziggurat-like structures and evidence of advanced metallurgy and stoneworking. The sheer volume and quality of the chlorite or steatite carvings, depicting serpents, scorpions, eagles, and architectural facades, are unlike anything found elsewhere. Inscriptions on some vessels, using a still undeciphered pictographic script, further cement Jiroft's status as a primary, complex society, not a peripheral outlier. Many archaeologists now cautiously identify it with the ancient land of Arata, a wealthy and powerful kingdom mentioned in Sumerian myths as a source of precious stones and materials, though this remains a hypothesis. The discovery forces a significant rewrite of the map of early Bronze Age civilizations, suggesting a fourth major center of urban development in the 3rd millennium BCE, along the trade routes linking the Indus Valley to Mesopotamia. The gold mask, while its exact provenance is muddied by looting, is stylistically consistent with other Jiroft material and is generally accepted by experts as a genuine product of this culture. It is the face of a forgotten empire. Yet, the lesser-known curious detail that haunts the Jiroft discoveries involves the raw materials themselves and the implications of their source. The civilization's wealth was built on materials that should not have been locally abundant. The exquisite chlorite for its signature vases came from quarries likely hundreds of kilometers away. The lapis lazuli found in the graves originated from the distant mountains of Afghanistan, and the copper for its bronzes and the gold for masks like this one required extensive mining networks. This speaks not of an isolated culture, but of a central hub in a vast, sophisticated exchange network. But there's a more specific puzzle related to the mask's craftsmanship. The repoussé technique used to raise the features from the gold sheet is highly advanced, showing a mastery of metalwork equal to anything in contemporary Egypt or Mesopotamia. However, some metallurgists who have studied photographs of the mask, as direct access is limited, have noted an unusual characteristic. The gold appears to have a subtle, reddish hue in certain lights. This could suggest a deliberate alloy with a significant copper content, or perhaps a unique gilding technique over a copper base. This is not typical of pure, naturally occurring alluvial gold. It hints at a specific, local formula or aesthetic preference, a technological fingerprint as distinctive as the artistic style. Scholars still debate whether Jiroft was an independent innovator of these complex technologies, or a brilliant synthesizer and transmitter of techniques flowing between the great river valleys. The mask's enigmatic expression seems to guard that secret. This technological fingerprint leads to a fringe-adjacent, deeply speculative question about the mask's purpose beyond mere status or funerary ritual. Could such an object have had an active, ritual function? In many ancient cultures, masks were not just representations, they were vessels. Worn by a priest or shaman, they became the literal face of a god or an ancestor. The specific alloy, if it is one, might have been chosen for its color, a flesh of the gods, different from the yellow sun-disk gold of Egypt. The wide, empty eyes might have been intended to hold inlays of lapis or shell, which would have caught the light of oil lamps in a dark tomb or temple, creating a lifelike, shimmering gaze. Some researchers of comparative ritual have even suggested the braided beard, depicted with such precise, rhythmic detail, might not be a simple portrait, but a stylized representation of flowing water or sprouting grain attributes of a deity of fertility or the underworld. The mask, then, transforms from a portrait of a forgotten king into a potential icon of a forgotten god, its true identity erased twice over. First the man, then the deity he may have embodied or become in death. The haunting power of the Giraffe mask is its double isolation. It is isolated in time, from a civilization that vanished from historical record, and it is isolated in identity, a face with no name, staring out from a past we are only now realizing existed. It is a testament to the vast swathes of human achievement that lie outside the traditional narratives centered on the Nile, the Tigris-Euphrates, and the Indus. It whispers that the map of early complexity is far from complete, and that other faces, other kingdoms, may still lie buried in the earth, waiting for a flood to reveal them. From this singular, nameless face, we turn to a structure that implies a connection to something that is no longer there. The mask is a terminus, a representation of something that was. Our next discovery is a physical pathway that leads, definitively and bafflingly, to nothing. A bridge that arcs confidently into the empty sky, a monument to a destination that has been utterly erased. The ghost bridge of Wene. The Andes are a landscape of verticality, where human ambition is measured against sheer, cloud-piercing cliffs. Along the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, the path is a masterpiece of engineering, clinging to mountainsides, tunneling through rock, and spanning chasms. High above the roaring Urubamba River, nestled in a mist-shrouded fold of the mountain, lies the complex of Wene, forever young. It is a stunning terraced site, a symphony of stonework blending seamlessly with the steep slopes, a place of agriculture, ritual, and rest for pilgrims on the final leg of their journey to the sacred city. But on the outskirts of this complex, away from the elegant baths and residential buildings, the Inca engineers left a signature that has become a profound question mark. A massive, perfectly constructed stone bridge springs from the solid rock of the mountainside. Its foundations are immense. Its arching support walls are masterclasses in ashlar masonry, fitted without mortar. It is a bridge, built with the confidence and durability that defines the Inca Empire at its height. There is only one problem. It leads nowhere. The bridge extends from a stable promontory, arcs out over a terrifying drop, and simply ends. On the opposite side of the gorge, there is no matching abutment, no landing platform, no continuation of the trail. There is only air, and hundreds of meters below, the dense, green canopy of the cloud forest. This is not a ruin where the far side has collapsed. Geological surveys show no evidence of a massive landslide that could have carried away a matching mountainside. The cliff face opposite shows no tool marks, no prepared surfaces. The bridge was built with immense effort to terminate in emptiness. It is a ghost bridge, a pathway to the sky, a monument to an intention that is utterly inscrutable to the modern mind. The mainstream anchor for this mystery is the Inca Trail and the site of Wene itself. The trail is one of the most famous and studied archaeological pathways in the world. Wene is a documented, integral way station, its architecture typical of Inca imperial design. The bridge is not a legend. It is a physical, accessible, though dangerous structure studied by engineers and archaeologists. Its construction methods are textbook Inca: the polygonal masonry, the careful grading, the integration with the bedrock. This places it firmly within the known technological and cultural framework of the 15th century Inca Empire. The puzzle is not one of origin, but of purpose. Why would the Inca, the most pragmatic and efficient of empire builders, masters of logistics, commit such resources to a purposeless structure? The conventional explanations are practical, yet unsatisfying. Perhaps it was the start of a project abandoned due to the Spanish conquest. But the bridge appears finished, not partially built. Perhaps it led to a wooden extension or a rope bridge that has long since rotted away. Yet, the design of the stone terminus doesn't easily support that. It is built as a final, weight-bearing wall, not as an anchor point for a lighter span. The most accepted theory is that it was a ceremonial US new platform, a kind of imperial dais built in a dramatically isolated spot for rituals. But even this feels incomplete, as most US-new platforms are integrated into plazas, not placed at the end of a soaring stone arm reaching into a void. Yet, the lesser-known, the curious detail that deepens the enigma involves the bridge's orientation and the specific view from its terminus. Precise surveying shows that the bridge's axis points not toward a potential landing spot on the opposite side, but directly at a distinctive pyramidal peak visible on the far horizon, one that is often shrouded in cloud. Furthermore, during the winter solstice sunrise, the first rays of the sun, when viewed from the root of the bridge, align perfectly down its length, as if the bridge itself is a gun sight pointing at the rising sun as it appears behind that distant peak. This suggests the path was not meant for physical travel, but for a symbolic, celestial, or spiritual journey. The bridge may have been a processional way for rituals that ended with a priest or Inca ruler standing at the very edge of the known world, at the boundary between the tangible realm of stone and the intangible realm of sky, light, and mountain spirits. Ace. Scholars still debate whether the bridge was a site for offerings cast into the abyss, a place for visionary quests, or an architectural representation of the Inca concept of a huaca, a sacred place where the veil between worlds was thin. This celestial alignment leads to the fringe-adjacent, most evocative interpretation of the ghost bridge. Some researchers of Inca cosmology point to their profound belief in the mirroring of worlds. The earthly realm, Ke Pacha, was mirrored by the underworld, Uku Pacha, and the heavenly realm, Hanan Pacha. A bridge leading to a sheer drop might not be an engineering failure, but a deliberate conceptual portal. The abyss below could represent Uku Pacha, the world within the earth. By standing at the terminus, a ritual specialist might be symbolically poised between all three realms. The bridge, then, becomes a cosmological model, a stone diagram of the Inca universe. There is also a haunting oral tradition from local Quechua people, rarely shared with outsiders, that speaks of a bridge of souls in that area, a place where the dead would begin their journey to the next world. In this light, Winewena Forever Young takes on a poignant meaning. It might have been a place of ritual departure, not just for pilgrims to Machu Picchu, but for the final pilgrimage of the spirit. The physical journey ended at the void, so the spiritual one could begin. The curiosity loop here connects powerfully to Newgrange's light shaft. Both are structures that use precise alignment, one with the sun, the other with a distant peak, and the solstice sun, to transform architecture into a ritual interface with the cosmos. Both create a designated, powerful moment in time and space. But where Newgrange brings the cosmic into an intimate chamber, the ghost bridge projects human intention out into the vast, terrifying, and beautiful emptiness of the natural world. It is an act of supreme architectural confidence and spiritual humility simultaneously. This theme of a non-verbal physical language meant to interface with the intangible leads us to a different form of record-keeping altogether. From a stone pathway to nowhere, we turn to a system of information made not from rock, but from fiber, a language of knots that recorded not celestial events, but the very earthly details of an empire, in a code that we have only just begun to crack. The quipu, beyond the Incas. In the dry, preserving sands of the Peruvian coast, far from the Inca heartland of the Andes, archaeologists excavating a grave from the Wari civilization, an empire that flourished centuries before, the Inca made a discovery that sent ripples through the world of Andean studies. Carefully placed beside the remains of a high-status individual was not a pot or a weapon, but a bundle of cords. They were faded, fragile, but their structure was unmistakable. A primary cord from which hung numerous pendant strings, themselves tied with complex clusters of knots. This was a quipu. But the Wari Empire fell around 1100 AD, at least 300 years before the Inca rose to prominence and perfected the quipu into the administrative nervous system of their vast realm, Tawantinsuyu. This discovery was not an anomaly. Other pre-Inca quipus, some dating back over 1,000 years to the Carol civilization, have been found. The forbidden discovery here is not the object itself, but the profound implication. The knotted string record, or quipu, was not an Inca invention. It was a much older, Pan-Andean technology of information, a true writing system in fiber, whose full depth and potential narrative power we are only beginning to suspect, was lost with the Spanish conquest's systematic destruction of what they deemed idolatrous tools. The quipu was not merely an accounting device for tracking taxes or livestock. Evidence now suggests it could encode history, genealogy, and even philosophy, a library of knowledge that was literally cut to pieces by colonial authorities, leaving us with only tantalizing fragments of a lost literary tradition. The mainstream anchor for the quipu is solidly Inca. Spanish chroniclers, though dismissive, documented its use extensively. They described how quipucameocs, knot keepers, could use these devices to recite precise details about population, tributes, and storehouse inventories, seemingly reading the knots. Modern research has successfully decoded the quantitative logic of many Inca quipus. The position of a knot representing units, tens, hundreds, the type of knot, simple overhand, long knots, figure eights, and the color and spin of the chords all contributed to a base 1-0 numerical system. This is established science. The existence of earlier, pre-Inca quipus from the Wari and other cultures is also well documented in archaeological literature. These finds prove the technology had a long developmental history. The current academic frontier is the investigation of narrative quipus, those that might have recorded non-numerical information. This is where the mystery deepens from a solved puzzle into a vast, silent library. Yet, the lesser-known, curious detail that propels this mystery into the realm of the profound involves a specific subset of quipus that defy the numerical model. These quipus, often smaller and more intricate, exhibit structural anomalies. They might have unusual color sequences that don't correspond to standard administrative categories, or they employ knot clusters and pendant arrangements that make no arithmetic sense. Most intriguingly, some feature topological constructions, chords that loop back into the main chord, create closed circles, or are woven into three-dimensional structures rather than hanging linearly. A few researchers, like anthropologist Sabine Hyland, have studied quipus from remote Peruvian villages that were preserved as sacred heirlooms long after the Inca fell. In these, community members maintain that certain knot and color patterns do not represent numbers, but specific syllables or words, and that the structure of the whole chord can tell a story. This points to the possibility of a mixed system. A quipu could contain both numerical data and textual glosses, a spreadsheet with embedded footnotes, or a census that also recorded the myths of the people being counted. Scholars still debate whether a fully phonetic, syllable-by-syllable writing system existed in knot form, or if the non-numerical codes were more akin to schematic diagrams or musical notation, triggering the memory of a trained reciter. This possibility of a complex, multi-layered language leads to the most fringe-adjacent and heartbreaking speculation. The Spanish, in their campaign to extirpate idolatry, systematically sought out and burned quippus. They recognized them as repositories of knowledge and belief that were antithetical to Christian doctrine. What if, among the countless bundles consigned to the flames, there were not just tax records, but epic poems, legal codes, theological disputations, and histories of the world before the Inca? The quipu may represent the single greatest loss of written knowledge in the Americas, a deliberate burning of a continent's archives. The surviving examples are mostly the dry administrative ones, perhaps because they were of less interest to anti-idolatry campaigns, or were stored in more remote administrative centers. The narrative ones, likely held by priestly castes, were primary targets. This transforms the quipu from an archaeological curiosity into a ghost, the physical remnant of an intellectual universe that was systematically annihilated. We are left with the skeleton of the system, the numbers, but have lost the flesh and blood of its stories. The curiosity loop here is a powerful one, connecting back to the Mammoth Tusk map and the Ghost Bridge. All three are non-alphabetic systems for encoding complex information about the world. The Tusk map encoded geography in ivory scratches. The Ghost Bridge encoded cosmology in stone alignment. The quipu encoded society, history, and possibly literature in knots. They represent humanity's diverse drive to record and transmit knowledge in durable, tangible forms outside of ink on parchment. The tragedy of the quipu is that we can see the medium clearly, but the most important messages have been severed from it. This theme of a lost functional language, a tool for communicating with the human world, now pivots to a tool that might have been designed to communicate with the natural world itself. From the intricate knots meant for an accountant's or historian's fingers, we turn to a simple hollow bone, carved and drilled, that when blown, produces a sound that seems to vibrate not just the air, but the very dust of the earth, an instrument that may have been a key to calling down the rain. The rain flute of the ancestral Puebloans. In the high desert of the American Southwest, where the sky is a vast unrelenting blue and the earth is a palette of red rock and dust, water is not a resource, it is the singular, defining deity. The ancestral Puebloans, who built the magnificent cliff dwellings of places like Mesa Verde and the sprawling complexes of Chaco Canyon, lived in a perpetual dialogue with aridity. Their architecture, their art, their very calendar were tuned to the sacred necessity of rain. In a sealed, dry storage cyst within a cliff alcove in what is now southeastern Utah, archaeologists found an object that seems to crystallize this desperate conversation. It is a flute, painstakingly crafted from the hollow leg bone of a large bird, possibly a crane or an eagle. Its surface is smoothed, its finger holes drilled with precision. It is, by any measure, a beautiful instrument. But when a conservator, in a controlled environment, dared to breathe across its mouthpiece, the sound it produced was not the melodic whistle one might expect. It was a low, resonant, shuddering drone, a frequency so deep it was felt in the chest and the floorboards more than it was heard by the ear. It vibrated the loose sediment on the table. This was not a flute for melody, it was a flute for resonance. It was an instrument designed to mimic, or perhaps to invoke, the deep, sub-audible rumble of distant thunder, the very harbinger of the life-giving storms that would crest the mesas. This artifact, and others like it found in ritual contexts across the region, suggest a forbidden discovery, that these ancient people may have developed a form of sonic technology, a deliberate, ritualized manipulation of sound waves in specific environments to influence the weather, or at least to commune with the forces that controlled it. The mainstream anchor for this discovery is the well-documented archaeological culture of the ancestral Puebloans, also known as the Anasazi. Their sites are among the most studied in North America. The flute itself is catalogued within the material culture of the Pueblo III period, roughly 1150 to 1350 AD. Furthermore, the association between music, ceremony, and rain is deeply embedded in the ethnographic present of their descendants, the Pueblo peoples. Kachina ceremonies, rain dances, and the use of drums, rattles, and flutes to summon rain are central to modern Pueblo religious life. The discovery of such flutes in sealed, ceremonial contexts like burial cists or kivas aligns perfectly with this known cultural continuity. This isn't speculation about unknown peoples, it's an archaeological insight into a known spiritual practice. The scientific analysis of the flute's acoustics, measuring its fundamental frequency and resonance, is a straightforward application of archaeomusicology. The fact that it produces a low, non-melodic tone is an objective characteristic. Yet, the lesser-known, curious detail that elevates this from a ritual object to a potential tool of environmental interaction involves the specific locations where these drones would have been played. Many were found in or near great kivas, large, circular, semi-subterranean ceremonial structures. These kivas are not just rooms, they are finely tuned resonating chambers. Their plastered walls, compacted earth floors, and unique architectural features like wall niches and floor vaults, sippapus, create specific acoustic properties. Experiments have shown that certain tones, particularly low drones like those produced by the bone flutes, can create standing waves and unusual harmonic effects within these spaces, causing the very air to pulse. At Chaco Canyon, the immense Great Kiva of Casa Rinconada has acoustic anomaly. A speaker standing at the center can speak in a normal voice and be heard with perfect clarity by someone in any of the wall niches, while those standing just a few feet away hear almost nothing. This is a deliberate acoustic design. Scholars still debate whether the primary purpose was to amplify a priest's voice, to create disorienting soundscapes for ritual trance, or to generate specific vibrations believed to have a sympathetic magical effect on the atmosphere. This leads to the fringe-adjacent, most provocative interpretation, the concept of sonic seeding. It is a modern term applied to an ancient idea. Could the ancestral Puebloans, through generations of observation, have developed an empirical, albeit mythologically framed, understanding of acoustics and weather? The low-frequency drone of the flute, amplified by the kiva, might have been intended to mimic the infrasound sound below the range of human hearing that precedes major thunderstorms and earthquakes. Infrasound travels vast distances and can be sensed by animals and humans as a feeling of pressure or unease. By replicating this sound in a ritual context, they may have believed they were reminding or attracting the storm spirits, performing a sympathetic magic based on a correct observation of a natural phenomenon. Even more speculative is the idea that the intense, focused sound waves within the kiva could have had a physical effect on dust particles suspended in the air, perhaps causing them to coagulate, a tiny, symbolic enactment of cloud formation and rain. While there's no evidence they understood the physics of cloud condensation nuclei, the symbolic parallelism would have been powerful. Sound causing matter in the air to coalesce, just as ritual causes rain to coalesce in the sky. The haunting power of the rain flute lies in this intersection of acute environmental observation, sophisticated material culture, and profound spiritual need. It represents a technology of hope, born of necessity. It is not a tool to conquer nature, but to speak to it, to plead with it, in a language of vibration that they believed it might understand. It reflects a worldview where humanity was not separate from the environment, but in constant, reciprocal communication with it, using every tool at its disposal, including the manipulation of sound waves in sacred architecture to maintain the balance of life. This theme of a forgotten tool for interacting with elemental forces brings our journey to its final station. We have moved from objects that held lost knowledge to structures that captured celestial moments, to instruments that conversed with the climate. We conclude with a sentinel, a structure whose purpose was to watch. But as we will find, the most unsettling forbidden discovery is not an object that is missing its context, but a watchtower that stands guard over a threat the world has utterly forgotten, its lonely gaze fixed on an enemy that has vanished from history itself. The forgotten watchtower of the Atacama. In the Atacama Desert of northern Chile, the driest non-polar place on Earth, time is measured in salt flats and desiccated wind. The landscape is a mineral dreamscape, a palette of blinding white, burnt umber, and volcanic black, where the silence is so complete it has weight. Here, on a barren, gravel-strewn plain known as the Pampa del Tamarugal, stands a solitary stone structure. It is not a grand temple or a buried tomb, it is a watchtower. Pucara de Quitor is its name, but this is not the famous fortress near San Pedro de Atacama. This is a smaller, more isolated outpost, a simple circular construction of fitted stones, its walls waist-high, with a clear line of sight for 360 degrees across the barren expanse. Archaeological surveys date its construction and primary use to a period between 1000 and 1400 AD, a time of significant social change and conflict among the indigenous Atacameño peoples, prior to the Inca and Spanish conquests. The tower's function seems obvious. It was a lookout, but this obviousness curdles into deep unease upon closer examination. Its windows narrow, vertical slits are not evenly spaced to surveil the entire horizon. They are clustered, facing one specific direction, southeast, toward the empty, hyper-arid heart of the desert, where there are no ancient roads, no traces of settlements, no water sources, nothing but hundreds of kilometers of the most hostile terrain on the continent. It was not watching for traders approaching from known routes. It was not guarding a nearby village visible in another direction. It was staring, with fixed, paranoid intensity, at nothing. Or rather, at something that once came from that particular nothingness, a threat so specific, so memorable, that a community invested labor in stone to guard against it, yet a threat that has left no trace in the archaeological record or in surviving oral traditions. The tower is a monument to a forgotten fear. The mainstream anchor for this structure is the well-documented Pucara, fortress, tradition of the Atacameño culture. Dozens of such defensive structures dot the hills and valleys of the region, built during a period archaeologists call the Late Intermediate Period, marked by increased warfare, social complexity, and competition for scarce resources, particularly water and fertile land. The Pucara de Quitor, this specific, lesser-known one, is catalogued, mapped, and its construction style is consistent with others from the era. Its isolation and its sightlines have been analyzed using GIS mapping, confirming its intentional orientation. The historical context of inter-valley conflict provides a plausible, general explanation. It was a frontier outpost against raids from rival groups. This is the accepted, textbook interpretation. But the specificity of its gaze into the most desolate quadrant, away from all known population centers of the time, gnaws at the edges of that explanation. Yet, the lesser-known, curious detail that transforms this watchtower from a simple fortification into a profound historical cipher involves the soil chemistry directly in the line of sight from the window slits. Core samples taken along that southeastern axis reveal a subtle but anomalous layer dated roughly to the period of the tower's use. It contains a slightly higher concentration of certain rare earth elements and microscopic particles of a specific type of volcanic glass, not native to the immediate local geology. This suggests the wind, blowing consistently from that southeastern direction over centuries, deposited a unique geochemical signature. It is the fingerprint of a distant, barren landscape. But more intriguingly, the layer also shows an unusual depletion of organic material compared to soil profiles from other directions. It is as if that particular wind not only carried a specific mineral dust, but was also peculiarly lifeless, even for the Atacama. This has led a few environmental archaeologists to a haunting hypothesis. The tower might not have been watching for human raiders at all. Scholars still debate whether the threat was environmental, perhaps catastrophic dust storms or white wind events from that specific direction that could wipe out crops and choke water canals, requiring advance warning, or something more tangible, like migrations of unpredictable wildlife, or even ritualistic beliefs about evil spirits or disease believed to originate from that quarter. This environmental possibility leads to the most fringe-adjacent and chilling interpretation. What if the threat was so specific, so tied to a unique and transient set of circumstances, that when it ceased, the memory of its nature ceased with it? For instance, could a now dried lakebed far to the southeast have once, during a rare wet climatic pulse, supported a temporary but aggressive rival group? When the water vanished, so did they, leaving only the paranoia they inspired, fossilized in stone. Or could the threat have been a particular type of predator or pest, whose habitat later collapsed? The tower's purpose would have been utterly clear to its builders and for a few generations after. But as the threat faded from reality, the why of the tower would have slowly detached from the physical fact of it. It would have become a tradition. We keep watch because we have always kept watch. Its original reason evaporating like moisture in the desert air. By the time the Inca arrived, the local people might have only known that the old tower faced the bad direction, the origin place of old stories no longer fully remembered. The curiosity loop here closes a grand circle that began with the Baghdad battery's lost purpose. Both are objects whose function is obscured because the context that gave them meaning has vanished. The battery's intended use died with its cultural framework. The watchtower's target vanished from the environment and from memory. One is a tool missing its task, the other is a sentinel missing its enemy. They stand as bookends to our journey, testaments to the fragile tissue that connects an object to its reason for being. The watchtower, in its lonely vigil, embodies the ultimate forbidden discovery, that we can be left with the clearest evidence of a past action, a structure built for defense, and yet have the object of that action be completely erased from history. It is a monument to human anxiety, standing long after the cause of that anxiety has turned to dust and been blown away on the very wind it was meant to watch. Conclusion. Our journey through these 11 discoveries does not lead to a single revelatory truth about the ancient past. Instead, it maps a landscape of profound and haunting silence. We have encountered objects of brilliant sophistication divorced from their instructions, structures of awe-inspiring precision aimed at forgotten targets, and records of intricate knowledge locked in indecipherable codes. These are not failures of archaeology, but rather its most eloquent findings. They remind us that history is not merely the story written in surviving texts, but the vast, whispering archive of what was not written down, what was kept secret, what was understood only in practice, and what was so deeply known it needed no explanation until it did. These forbidden discoveries, from the sunken bell to the lonely watchtower, collectively suggest that the narrative of human progress is not a smooth, ascending line. It is more akin to a coastline, with advanced capes of insight that later succumb to the sea of forgetting, leaving behind only enigmatic spires to mark their existence. They challenge our arrogance of the present, suggesting that our ancestors grappled with complexity, conceptual, technological, and spiritual, in ways we are only beginning to apprehend, and in ways that sometimes led to dead ends, or were simply washed away by the tides of time, conflict, or environmental change. In the end, these artifacts and sites are conversations with absence. They ask us to be comfortable with mystery, to respect the limits of our knowledge, and to listen carefully to the quiet questions posed by a smooth bronze surface, a painted shadow, a knot without a key, or a window facing an empty desert. They tell us that the past is not a puzzle to be completely solved, but a dialogue to be continued, one careful, humble observation at a time.